Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges-Watson. Coming up today, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is given a full red carpet welcome by the US President Donald Trump as he begins his visit to Washington. We ask a number of geopolitical experts, what do both sides want to get out of this visit? Plus, we ask the former US ambassador to Riyadh for his take on the state of relations between the two countries. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin in Washington, where Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman today began a high-profile visit. Well, in a sign of the close ties between the two countries, the US President Donald Trump gave him a lavish welcome at the White House. Well, President Trump has praised the 40-year-old Crown Prince, calling him a very wise friend and saying that he's doing a spectacular job. In particular, he noted the Crown Prince's leadership and Vision 2030 reforms. Well, this visit highlights Saudi Arabia's global influence and the long-standing US-Saudi partnership, with talks focusing on defence, energy, investment and advanced technology cooperation. Well, we're joined now by Michael Ratney, who is former US ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Ambassador Ratney, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to Al Arabiya English. The United States and Saudi Arabia have this 8-decade-long diplomatic relationship. What's your interpretation of what the state of that relationship is right now?
So thanks for having me on this morning. I think the relationship is in pretty good shape. Over those 8 decades, there's certainly been some ups and downs. In the course of the Biden administration, it went down and then it got much, much better. During the Trump administration, I think in substance, it's quite good. And also, it seems like President Trump and the Saudi Crown Prince have a remarkably warm rapport. And I think that's probably what we'll see on display in Washington today.
Right, yeah, I was going to ask you about the relationship between the two men. And as you say, it's an extremely strong relationship. In an article penned in the New York Times, you wrote that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has made advances once thought unimaginable. And I'd like to ask you, since you served in Riyadh until the start of the year, what are the main changes that you've observed in Saudi Arabia during the past decade?
The changes are sort of in two categories. Economic, there's a huge economic diversification effort going on, and also societal. And I think for somebody that visited Saudi Arabia 5, 10, 15 years ago, and then again in this recent period, that's the most dramatic change that you see. It's the most palpable thing. Saudi was famous for women being marginalized in society, for example. And now you go and Saudi women are everywhere. They're in the workforce in large numbers. They can drive. They can basically control their lives in ways that they never could before. So I think that's the most obvious thing when you step off a plane and visit the country. But there's a lot of other things as well. Saudi was never a country where you had an arts and culture scene, for example. And now there's movie cinemas and concerts and art exhibitions in a way that were once not only unheard of, but actually illegal in the country.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really striking when you look at the demographics of Saudi Arabia that 70% of the population is under the age of 35. And here we're talking about the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's just turned 40. I mean, do you attribute much of the change in Saudi Arabia to him personally and the fact that he is a leader really quite close in age to his population?
Yeah, absolutely. He marks the generational shift in the leadership, although he's obviously not king yet. I think he eventually will be. All of the other kings of Saudi Arabia have been sons of the founder of Saudi Arabia, and this will be the first grandson of the founder, the first generational shift. And I think part of that, he understands the demographic that he represents. Saudi is a fairly young country, and they have the ambitions of young people. They want to be normal. They want recreation. They want jobs. They want all of those things. And I think he understands that in a really kind of palpable sense.
And Ambassador, President Trump has clearly pulled out all the stops for this visit and rolled out the red carpet. What's your interpretation of what he and the American administration wants out of this visit?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because a lot of what we've read is what Saudi Arabia wants from the United States. But obviously, President Trump has some expectations, too. I think he'll talk about normalization, the prospect of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, although I don't think that's in the cards right now. I think it's something that President Trump has ambitions for. I think the president has ambitions for large investments from Saudi and elsewhere in the Gulf into the United States. I think some of the numbers I've heard have been enormous in the billions and billions of dollars, and I think he'd like to announce that. And he'd like to announce commercial deals, the prospect of U.S. defense sales to Saudi Arabia, for example. He just mentioned yesterday that the F-35 would be something that would be offered to Saudi Arabia. So I think for him, there's a personal component to it, but also I think he sees this in starkly commercial terms. He sees this as kind of economic opportunity for the United States.
And prior to serving in Riyadh, I gather you were the U.S. chargé d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Israel. And I'm wondering how much discussion you expect President Trump and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to have about the Israel-Palestinian issue.
Oh, I don't think it'll be a part of the public discussion, but I think privately, I'm sure they'll talk about it. I'm sure the Saudis, like others in the region, are relieved that, at least for now, we're in a period of ceasefire. And there's a prospect. The UN Security Council resolution passed yesterday authorizing a security force. So there's some forward momentum. And I think for the Saudis, that's all for the good. The Saudis are looking to de-escalate the conflicts in the region so that they can focus on what they're doing internally. And I think that will be part of the discussion with President Trump. I also think the president, as I mentioned, will talk about the prospect of Saudi's relationship with Israel at some point. I think until we're in a better place with respect to Gaza, I don't think the Saudis are going to consider that. But I think in the long term, it still remains a possibility.
And what message do you think Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman brings to Washington in this regard?
I think, their message publicly for a while, and I think that'll be reiterated today, is to really get past where we are in Gaza at this point. The Saudis, and I think other Arabs as well, they want to see the Israeli Defense Forces out of Gaza completely. Right now, they're occupying half of the Strip and still essentially control life there. I think they want to see an end to Israeli military involvement in Gaza. And then politically, they want to see a path forward, at least towards the prospect of a Palestinian state. And that would require an Israeli government commitment in that direction. And at this point, the Israelis haven't been willing to talk about either thing, either a complete withdrawal from Gaza at this point, or the prospect of a Palestinian state. And I think the Crown Prince is going to make that clear to the president, that those are the requirements that they've had publicly, and they're reflective of the sentiment in his country and the sentiment throughout the region.
And how much do you think that red line and this insistence on a Palestinian state, to what extent do you think that will shape President Trump's approach to this issue?
I think he knows it. He understands it. I think he'll push. I think in a way it may give him greater incentive to push Netanyahu further on these issues. I think it was through Trump's pressure on Netanyahu that got us to a ceasefire and a hostage release. It got us as far as we've come now in the past couple of weeks. And I think President Trump will see in rather clear terms what's going to be required if they want to move ahead to this prize that he's so anxious for.
And clearly these last 12 months have been 12 months of enormous change in the region from which I'm speaking to you. And one of the things that I think a lot of people found was a real watershed moment for the Gulf in particular was the Israeli strike on Doha in September. And I'm wondering how much of a game changer you think that strike was. What do you think came out of that?
So I think it was a shock to the region, certainly to the Qataris, but also to everyone else in the Gulf, the Emiratis, the Saudis. I think every country of the GCC was shocked to see that happen. And I think it reinforced, in a sense, among some countries, certain doubts about the United States as a reliable security partner. And on the one hand, I think those doubts became clearer. On the other hand, the reaction was not to sort of withdraw from their desire for a stronger security relationship with us. I think what they want is greater clarity in that security relationship with us. I think that's going to be a big part of the discussions today with the Saudis. I think they recognize that their long-term security prospects are best with a strong U.S.-Saudi partnership. I think they're just going to want absolute clarity in that. That's why the Saudis have been pushing for something more than just a defense agreement. They've wanted a mutual defense treaty, something that in our system would require ratification by the U.S. Senate. I don't think that's possible right now, but I think they're going to use this opportunity to press Trump for the strongest possible commitments to Saudi defense.
Now, during the years 2015 to 2017, you served as the US Special Envoy for Syria. Now, that's another country that's had undergone enormous change the last 12 months. And it seems to be very much on the radar of both the US and the Saudi leadership. And I'm wondering why you think Syria is such a focus for those two countries.
So I think for Saudi, it's clear. Saudi Arabia regarded the war in Syria that went on for at least 12 or 13 years is just a losing proposition, right? It was bad for the Syrians. It was bad for the region because it stoked radicalization. It brought, Iranian influence into the region. It triggered population flows. It was all bad. And I think the Saudi approach at this point is just whether or not these conflicts are resolvable is an open question. What they'd like to do is just de-escalate them, eliminate to the extent they can the pernicious effects of these conflicts. And Syria was the best example of that. Even before Assad fell, I think the Saudi objective had just been to de-escalate the conflict and return to some sort of an uncomfortable status quo. With Assad gone, it created a new opportunity. It created risks, obviously, because the gentleman that took over in Syria is somebody with a difficult past. He comes from a jihadi background. There were grave doubts about the direction he would take the country. But I think they saw positive signals from what he was saying and what he was doing. And I think from the Saudi perspective, that's worth taking a chance on. It's better than the alternative because for them, the alternative is basically chaos. So they took a chance with him. They want to invest in him. They urged President Trump to do the same. And that means opening up the economy, dropping the huge web of sanctions that the US and other countries have put in place. And basically, rather than ostracizing the Ahmadinejad, to at least try to embrace him and move him in the right direction. So I think that's where the Saudis were coming from. And I think that was impressed upon President Trump when he visited Riyadh a few months ago. I don't know whether President Trump came into that with any great preconceptions about Syria. If anything, I think he just wanted nothing to do with it. But I think between his conversations with the Saudi crown prince and probably with the Turkish president as well, he came to the same view, which is engage, let the economy breathe, give this guy a chance.
Okay, and just lastly, I just want to ask you, having served as US ambassador to Saudi Arabia, for any anecdotes, any memories that strike you about the degree to which the country has changed in the last few years? I know you left in January of this year. I expect you've been going to Saudi Arabia for many years. What was most striking about the Saudi Arabia you left behind you in January of this year versus the Saudi Arabia you knew perhaps a decade or so ago?
The biggest change is the one I mentioned a moment ago. They're just the role of women in society. I would sit with Saudi women who were describing to me their experiences, and you would swear they're telling you about the stories about how their mother or their grandmother used to live years and years ago. But that's not the case. These are Saudi women, often in their late 20s, telling you about their experiences in their early 20s. And now you see them embracing these economic opportunities, taking a role in society, being every bit as hardworking and ambitious as anybody in that country. And it's really remarkable. And it actually has nothing to do with how they dress. That's sort of the most superficial thing that people in the United States tend to focus on. It's their role. It's what they're doing. It's where they're working. It's the jobs that they're taking. It's such a palpable change.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, you say that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been very much a part of that, partly by virtue of the fact he's of the same generation as the majority of the Saudi population. Just lastly, what's the photo opportunity, the big moment that you think perhaps will immortalize this visit in terms of photography?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's going to be the Crown Prince and President Trump with very big smiles on their face when they're announcing something. And I don't know whether it's going to be in the area of artificial intelligence or defense or energy or any of the things that they're doing. I think that sort of personal rapport that the two of them have will come through loud and clear.
Okay, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Michael Ratney, former US ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks for the invitation.
Well, let's get more now. We're joined by Dr. Amr Fakhoury, who is a professor of international law at the American University in the Emirates. Thank you very much indeed for coming to see us.
Thank you for having me here today. Thank you.
As we've been saying, red carpet treatment for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. President Trump calling Saudi Arabia a great ally.
That's right.
What are your observations about the US-Saudi relationship?
That's right. That's right. Well, actually, this is very important and significant visit for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the United States. This visit, I think, should be seen as a continuation to President Trump's earlier visit to the Middle East and his particular meeting in Riyadh back in May. That visit was a turning point. It opened the gate for a bilateral relation between the two capitals. And now the visit of His Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the state it comes as a follow-up to that important meeting. It aims to translate the promises and understanding that held at Riyadh into concrete action. In other words, what has been held in Riyadh at that time will be now moved to Washington in order to create concrete relationship between two countries and in order to have more roadmap between the two capitals.
Right, so we're almost exactly 6 months, aren't we, since their meeting in Riyadh. And clearly the personalities of the two men in question play a part here. President Trump, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. How do you think their personalities drive and shape the relationship?
Actually, this is a very interesting question. Actually, the relation between the two capitals, it's very strong, and these capitals should take into consideration also the moment, actually, because the moment that the moment it's very sensitive and it's very special. And actually, since the relation between the two leaders are very strong, so that will help the region in order to build more concrete action for the region. I believe that our region is going through big changes, either in Yemen, in Palestine, in Syria, in Lebanon, and even for the countries who decided to repositioning themselves after the recent conflict. So the relation between the two leaders actually will help actually in order to shape the relation in the Middle East and in order to have more peace, more security, more prosperity, more development for the countries. So since we are talking about the timing is very important. So I think now the two leaders, they decided to open the gate for a new era of collaboration. The agenda of the meeting, it's very, very vast. They will not talk only about politics. They will talk about different subjects. They will talk about energy. They will talk about investment. They will talk about AI. They will talk about the challenges at the Middle East. So and how to limit the influence of some countries, especially Iran.
Sure. I mean, we'll come on to some of those points in a moment, but I just want to pick up on what you were saying there, which is essentially, if this relationship between Washington and Riyadh is strong,
right,
you're saying it's going to have a repercussion beyond Saudi Arabia, but across the whole region.
No doubt. Actually, the leaders today will not talk about only the bilateral relation. They will also cover some other aspects in the region, especially the challenges and the changing in the Middle East. Actually, it's very important that the two leaders be on the same page, and this is very important idea, and be sure that their collaboration and their partnership remains strong and well coordinated. So I think there is very interesting message behind this visit, which is Saudi Arabia is not only a regional power; it's also a global player that ready to work with ready to work with the American administration, either Republican or Democratic. Either they are ready to work with all in order to promote, as I mentioned, prosperity and peace for not only for the GCC country but also to the Middle East. No doubt. Two leaders will discuss some regional topics, such as how to work together in order to limit the influence of Iran in the region without opening the door for a new conflict, because as we all aware that Saudi Arabia, they want stability. They don't want confrontation with Iran. They want to keep the diplomatic channels open with everyone. So this is a very important topic that they will discuss, how to limit the Iranian influence to the region. So we should not also forget that there is, our region is too hot, and the peace process in the Middle East, it's very complicated. So for that reason, they will discuss this difficult topic, which is the peace process, and how to deal also with the Iranian influence, how to deal with the reconstruction of Gaza, how to deal with the reconstruction in Syria, and even maybe the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. So both leaders will not only talk about bilateral relation, they will talk for sure about the regional topic that it seems that they will shape the future of their relationship.
Yeah, and just going back to what we were saying at the beginning about how this is the follow-up,
Right.
6 months on from the Riyadh meeting, at which we saw the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, really being embraced by President Donald Trump, bringing Syria out of Iran and Russia's sphere of influence and very much into Saudi Arabia and America's. I mean, that's a key and significant diplomatic achievement, isn't it, for Riyadh and Washington?
Exactly. Actually, Syria will be at the heart of this meeting. You know that Syria, during the last 14 years, passed from civil war. Now they are going to stability, and Saudi Arabia played very important role and constructive role in order to open the gate for Syria to join the international community, to join the Arab League, to join the United Nations. Again, you know that Syria, for more than 50 years, it was suspended from international relation. Now the door is open because of the influence and the relationship between Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the leaders in Saudi Arabia with Americans. No doubt that this is a very positive advantage for Syria and for the region in general. I think now we can observe that Syria they joined the international community because of that kind of influence made by His Highness Crown Prince.
Yeah, and last week we were talking about President al-Shara's visit to Washington on this channel.
That's it.
And of course, that being a product of the talks that happened in Riyadh back in May. And when we were having that conversation and analysing that situation, some of our commentators said to us that a stable Syria meant a stable region. Do you agree with that?
100%. Stable Syria means a stable region. You know, Syria now, they are facing very big challenges. And one of the challenges that Syria are facing right now, it's international economic sanction made either by the United Nations or by the American administration. And back in May, we remember that American president, he decided to remove all the economic sanctions. But, you know, one of the economic sanctions called Caesar Act. And Caesar Act, you know, this is very tough and severe economic action sanction against Syria, and unfortunately, it's not only by executive order will be removed. We need the intervention of American Congress, you know, because this law has been established by the Congress, so the Congress should remove this sanction. And I think again, I think Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will discuss with the American leader about how to work together in order to remove all kinds of sanctions, especially the Caesar Act, because without removing Caesar Act, actually joining the international community by Syria, I think it would be very, very, very difficult. The most important thing is to solve the economic problem, and this is one of the topics that I believe will be on the table between the two leaders.
Okay, and another thing that's really changed the dynamic in this region was the Israeli airstrike on Doha back in September.
Right.
How much of a shock was that, do you think, for the Gulf region? And how do you think that's changed perceptions about regional security and perhaps something that will be discussed again between President Trump and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman?
Yes, exactly. Actually, after the aggression made by Israel against Doha, let me first of all clarify this is a clear violation of international law, clear violation of the United Nations Charter, and a clear violation of international norm. It's a clear aggression. We cannot say more than this. It's a clear violation. And we remember that there is a discussion between American leader and the Emir of Qatar about this aggression, and later we received that message that it seemed that there is a clear excuse from the Israeli for the Qatari about this aggression. You know that one of the topics that will be discussed at the American summit today, Saudi American summit, will be about the military collaboration between the two leaders. The military collaboration in terms of fighting terrorism, in terms to bringing peace to the region, in terms of fighting even cyber threat. So military collaboration, military defense between two leaders will be one of the topics that will be discussed by the two leaders. And it seems that the Saudi Arabia, they want something similar to the agreement that has been signed between Qatari and American, a kind of collaboration. I don't want to reach to the point like Article 5 from NATO. You know, Article 5, it's a collective defense. I don't think we will reach to this point, but however, I think that the military collaboration between two countries will go further, and I think they will sign something similar to the agreement or a treaty that's been signed between Qatari and Americans.
And ahead of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's visit to Washington, President Trump announced that, yes, indeed, we will be selling, he said, F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. And until now, Israel's been the only country in the Middle East to have those F-35s. How significant is this?
Yeah, you know that when we are talking, when we're talk about this kind of airplanes, this is very strong and airplanes, and the only country in the region that have this or possess this kind of airplanes is Israel. So we need to balance between we need kind of balance in the region, and buying this kind of aircraft to Saudi Arabia, I think that will help in order to make a balance in the region. I know that this needs the approval from the Congress, not only from the American administration, because this is a legal question, because usually buying this kind of aircraft needs the approval of the Congress. And we should not forget that previously there is a very important law signed by the Congress gives the priority for Israeli in order to have this kind of weapons, if you may say that. So this kind of aircraft will maybe balance the situation in the Middle East. Maybe that will bring stability, I think, to the region.
One of the points you were making earlier, discussions about the situation in Gaza, Saudi Arabia's position on a future Palestinian state.
Yes.
President Trump is expected to somehow address this issue of broadening the Abraham Accords.
That's right.
And seeking Saudi Arabia's normalization of ties with Israel.
That's right.
But Saudi Arabia seems to be saying not yet. Why?
Okay, let me clarify regarding the peace process first of all. Actually, Saudi Arabia played very important role in order to push and to bring stability in the Middle East, and they also supported the Palestinian cause to create their country. And we remember all the efforts made by Saudi Arabia while they decided, in collaboration with France, to hold very important conference, if you remember, held at the umbrella of the United Nations. United Nations, the organization that is his main or their duty is to maintain international peace and security. So after this conference, the message of that conference was clearly creating two states. State is the living side by side, Israeli state and Palestinian state is the only viable and way in order to have comprehensive and lasting peace in the Middle East. And I know that the Americans, they want, Saudi Arabia wants to join the Abraham Accord, and even the American president himself, he said that they want Saudi Arabia to join Abraham Accord. But let me clarify that Saudi Arabia is not against Abraham Accord. They want to join peace because they want to build peace. But building peace in these conditions actually seems, till now, it's a little bit complicated. Why? Because Saudi Arabia, they clearly said that in order to join Abraham Accord, there is precondition, which is the creation of viable Palestinian state living side by side with the Israeli. But till now, I don't think this condition is met. Why? Because if we observe the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who said clearly, who objected clearly the creation of Palestinian state, that gives us the impression that this condition, which is requested by Saudi Arabia to create the Palestinian state, is not met till now. That gives us the impression that this is not the correct time to join maybe by Saudi the Abraham Accord, while they are not against Abraham Accord. They want peace. They want to build peace. But since we are talking about Middle East, and we should not forget the efforts made by Saudi Arabia at that important conference. As a result of that conference, if you remember, there is many international leaders and countries, such as big power, such as France and UK. Those countries are permanent members of Security Council, and they decided to move forward and to recognize the Palestinian state, and and also other countries they decided to join. So, in my view, I think the outcomes of that conference will be taken into consideration. The outcomes of the conference held at the United Nations with the support of Saudi will be one of the conditions in order to join Abraham Accord.
And how much do you think this position of Saudi Arabia on a future Palestinian state, a very clear position they have, how much do you think that's shaped US policy now towards finding a durable solution?
You know that Americans, they know clearly that the Saudi Arabia plays very important role in the region, and if Saudi Arabia decided to join Abraham Accord, all the other countries, it seems, will join the accord. So no doubt that the relation between the two leaders will solve this issue. I don't know exactly the time. This is impossible to mention right now, but I know that Saudi Arabia and especially American president knows exactly that the influence of Saudi Arabia in the Middle East in order to shape the relation, in order to shape the region in general, plays very important role. So I think that American they relies on Saudi to join the Abraham Accord, but at the same time they know exactly their position. They know exactly that there is a precondition that should be met, which is the creation of Palestinian state, viable, living side by side with the Israeli, in order to build comprehensive and lasting peace in the Middle East.
And just lastly, clearly some big deals are expected during the course of this visit. We've touched on a couple of them, obviously energy, tech, AI, defense. What are the big deals you're going to be looking out for?
Right, exactly. This is one of the topics that will be discussed by the two leaders: economy and energy, and even investment. You know that Saudi Arabia, there is a clear vision for the Saudi Arabia, which is 2030. This vision 2030 the idea of this vision is to reduce dependence on oil and diversify the economy. So for that reason, Saudi Arabia will invest heavily in this summit in order to bring the most important high-tech technology and in order to diversify economy based on this vision 2030. So if we follow the news, the second day of the summit, there is another important forum will be held between the Saudi and American. This forum actually organized by Ministry of Investment and in collaboration with Saudi American Council. This forum will be a very important place in order to sign agreements with the American companies that will join the ambition of Saudi Arabia in order to diversify their economy, in order to attract the most important companies in terms of AI, in terms of security, in terms of economy, and even energy. And since we are talking about energy, we should not forget that Saudi Arabia now, and since they want to diversify their economy, they are very interesting to have peaceful nuclear program. This program will help Saudi to diversify their economy and to take advantage from nuclear power. You know that Saudi Arabia is part of NPT, which is Non-Proliferation Treaty, which underscores every single state to use nuclear power for peaceful purposes. And I think this subject will be examined by the two leaders.
Okay, so clearly lots of things under discussion there.
That's right.
The two leaders. We're going to have to leave it there, we're out of time, but really appreciate you coming to see us. Dr. Amar Fakhri, Professor of International Law at the American University in the Emirates. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you for you, sir.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Dr. Aziz Al-Ghashian, who is a lecturer of international relations at Naif Arab University. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on the programme. This is clearly a full red carpet welcome sort of a visit. There's a flyby, there's going to be cannon fire, a gala dinner. What does that tell us, do you think, about the state of relations between Riyadh and Washington?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor to join you again. I think it really speaks to two things. I think it speaks to the strategic depth that both Saudi Arabia and the United States have with each other. I think they realize, notwithstanding the multipolarization of the world that's happening, and even at sometimes the doubt that people may have regarding, I think, the commitments that the United States have, or the United States has, it speaks, I think, to the fact that at the end of the day, both see each other as strategic partners. Now, in this case, there may be a question of elevating this relationship really from a strategic partnership to a strategic alliance. And I think, in my opinion, the pump and the ceremony is probably something that was reciprocated time and again. I think both characters are both are huge characters, and both, therefore I think this is something they both see that is very befitting to each other and befitting to the moment in Saudi American relations. I think it's an interesting milestone that they've both reached.
Yeah, and this is really the follow-up, isn't it, to the meeting that happened in May. And in fact, you and I discussed the visit to Riyadh of President Trump. Now, during this visit by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, there are expected to be a series of agreements. And President Trump has already teased the F-35 stealth fighter jets. What are you going to be looking out for?
Well, I think, firstly, I just maybe a few words on why I think it's on how quick this follow-up is. In my opinion, I think for the Saudi ruling elite, they realized that it's best to follow up on some of these deals, on the momentum that was built on the previous meeting in Riyadh as quick as possible, because they want to make sure to get a lot of the deals as they can, or as many deals as they can, over the line. And because they also sense that there's opportunities that they have with Trump that they probably won't have with others, which is basically, and this now leads directly to your question, which is basically, I'm really looking at the nexus of business and tech. For me, I think this is something that I think MBS finds incredibly strategic for them, especially obtaining chips that probably was a bit more difficult to obtain in the previous administration, or maybe in a subsequent administration. The other thing I'm really looking at is what kind of defense relationship are we going to see? Are we going to see an alliance? Are we going to see a consolidation of military relations or not? So I think, Donald Trump mentioned that the F-35s will be sold. It's going to depend what kind of F-35s and what are the prerequisites and the conditions. But the fact that I think he said it will be sold suggests there's momentum, and I think it's too costly to with kind of back down from it. The other thing also is, I think, nuclear energy. And in my opinion, I think that's probably the most sensitive aspect out of all of these things. This is something that I anticipate will reach a particular development in the relationship, or let me say it this way: it will probably shorten the gap, this visit, but I don't think it will reach what Saudis really want, because what the Saudis really want is more flexibility when it comes to enriching uranium and also exporting uranium. So this is something I think that, this meeting, this summit, in my opinion, could be a milestone, a facilitatory step, rather than a culmination of Saudi-American relations. So I think, for me, that's the thing that I'm really looking at most.
Sure. So, I mean, clearly both sides stand to gain. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. I want to ask you about something that's happened since we last spoke, which was the Israeli airstrike on Qatar. And I'm wondering how you think that has shifted the perception of security on the Arabian Peninsula, notably in the minds of people in Riyadh.
Yeah. Well, I have to say there were two things that shifted the notions of security since we last spoke in May. Firstly, the Iran-Israel war. The Iran-Israel war has illustrated the fact that, listen, we've seen the dangers of both states, both Iran and Israel, and what they could do. Not only that, what makes it even far more dangerous, I think, for the GCC and Saudi Arabia in particular also, is the fact that we are basically on the front lines of two other people's wars. And this really makes the situation even more, the security landscape for Saudi to be even more complicated, not even dangerous, but even very, very complicated. So that's one thing, and that really has changed the security perception. But I think your point is right when it comes to the attack on Doha, the Israeli attack on Doha. That has significantly changed the security perception regarding Israel. It is now clear for many people in the region and in Saudi Arabia, and let me just say this, for the youth as well, for Saudi youth, and I'll come to why that is important, for the Saudi youth to say that, listen, the new security threat now is Israel. And look at how astonishing that change was. Once it was a potential ally, now it's all of a sudden the security threat. And I think really Israel really takes the Netanyahu regime is the one that really takes is at fault for this, because not only did they say or do these attacks and conduct these attacks on Doha, but they also put a warning out and said, listen, this is to everybody. This is a message to everyone in the region. And so I think this speaks to how far there is of an understanding between Saudi Arabia and Israel when it comes to matters of security. Because a lot of the times people say, well, they're actually joined in the hip. And that's complete nonsense. There's a great deal of insecurity in between that relationship, in between Israel and the region. So the security threat in the region, the security perception has significantly changed. And this is something that makes the notion of normalization even more unlikely.
Right, because, Saudi Arabia has been pretty clear that, normalization is not going to happen yet. And I'm wondering why you think not yet.
Well, for, I think, 3 reasons. In my opinion, firstly, I would say the domestic public opinion in Saudi. It's domestic public opinion in Saudi, especially when it comes to the youth, is very, very much hostile towards any notion of normalization. In my opinion, the fact that normalization is treated, quite frankly, as a derogatory term. The term mutabbi' or tatbi' is used as a curse. It's derogatory. That's how bad the situation has become. Moreover, I think the Israeli government has gone time and again to make it very clear that they will not concede anything towards a Palestinian state. And this is to do with their own domestic politics and their own silly season and their own rhetoric towards their own bases. But also on the United States front, in order for Saudi Arabia, based on what the logic of normalization would be when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Israel, Saudi Arabia requires things from the United States, and that requires a treaty. And that treaty requires 67 votes in the Senate. And this means that there has to be a more amicable political landscape in the United States. And that is just not there whatsoever. It's very, very difficult. And next year, we're going to go into midterms, which means that the Democrats will be most likely in control of the Senate. And so I think the whole political dynamics is just very difficult. The last point is the following. I think the fact that Israel has been going on striking at will what it wanted suggests that if there is any discussions of normalization, it's bullied into normalization. It's from a point of vulnerability rather than a point of weakness, and that's something that no one could afford to even talk about. So just the environment is not there, and I will just say this way: for normalization to happen, loads of stars need to be aligned, and now some of these stars are not even in the same galaxy. So it's just very difficult to see normalization happening in the near future.
Just changing the subject slightly and moving away from the issue of normalization of ties with Israel. I was just reading one Saudi commentator. I don't know if you're aware of his work, Abdulrahman al-Rashid. He writes in the Saudi daily Al-Sharq al-Awasat. He said, quote, "It's not an exaggeration to say that the success of Saudi-American relations will have a big impact on the region's stability and prosperity." Do you agree with that? And why do you think this relationship is so pivotal to the whole region's prosperity?
Well, I think it comes to the notion of Saudi Arabia's size, its sheer size. And, other countries have visions, and other countries have also projects, and they're no less important. But, Saudi Arabia is the biggest country in the region. And as a result, its survivability and its prosperity has more resonance and has more reverberations than probably other countries would. As a Saudi, I don't like to enter into this whole size game because, countries, it's not about the size. It's about, the will, and it's about kind of, more than that. It's about, efficiency, etc. But what I will say is that in this case, size does matter. And so when a country like the United States is investing in Saudi Arabia, and when you have the international superpower, albeit competing superpower, with a regional superpower, this is now important for, I think, the security of the region, because I think the security of the region now is more interconnected to international security. And so it really is a web of an interconnectivity of real security, international security, and a convergence of international security and regional security with also national security. So it really is, a lot has to do with the size, a lot has to do with really the region and the role and the function that it's playing in an ever multipolarizing world, and in a multipolarizing region that many poles around the world are competing towards or competing in, and also competing with. And so stability is of the essence. And the last point I would say about this is we're beginning to see prosperity and security become very overlapped. I mean, this is something that hasn't been there in the region before. I mean, at times, I think the security rhetoric and the economic rhetoric were probably, you could see daylight between them. Now, I think it's just inextricably tied. And therefore, prosperity must have security, and vice versa.
Yeah, and just while we're talking about prosperity and the Saudi economy, it's changed immeasurably as an economy over the last decade. I'd just like to ask you, as a Saudi, why is this change necessary, and what's the most significant change, economically speaking, that you've witnessed during the course of the last decade?
Well, for me, I mean, in the last decade, half of that decade, I was abroad. I was living in the UK, and even probably a decade before that even. But, so I spent a great deal of time outside Saudi. And every time I visited, every few months, you could see a change happening. And it's very interesting to see, because there was an uptick in this change. Now, I think you could see the change even when you're in Saudi. For me, I think just the exposure and the fact that I think many people that visit Saudi, even people that I never thought would visit Saudi, are visiting Saudi. And this is due to the openness, I think, of Saudi. This is due to a lot of the festivals and a lot of the things that probably the previous generation in Saudi probably did not pay too much attention to, or maybe undermined the impact of that. But these are machines, vehicles of trying to make sure Saudi Arabia is opening up, and actually, bringing in a great deal of people from abroad to Saudi Arabia. So I think for me personally, the exposure that Saudi Arabia has, and the fact that the tourism that I see, for me is very interesting, and the ease of which people could go into Saudi now. Time and again, people are saying, I'd love to go to Saudi. And before I'd say, yeah, you could come to Saudi. And I was like, yeah. In my mind, I'm saying, good luck. Try to find the paperwork that you need. Now, this is less of an obstacle. And so personally, amongst other things, this is the thing that stood out the most.
Right, and what you're saying makes me think about the talks in Washington. We've got that forum, that US-Saudi business forum tomorrow. I mean, this diversification of the Saudi economy surely means great opportunities for US investors.
Absolutely. And not only this, in my opinion, I think it's one thing to have, investors say Saudi is open for business. It's another thing, in my opinion, that American investors say it is open for business. And that's just the reality, because, and that's clear. And this is something that I, recently wrote about, and said this, how Saudi views the United States. And I think the way I put it was, it viewed it in an asymmetric multipolar world. And what I meant by that was that, yes, there are options out there, but it still seems to view the United States as its main preference. And so, the United States is the biggest economy still. As the saying goes, if they sneeze, everybody else catches a cold. And I think, notwithstanding the fact that there are options and the landscape is changing and there are, diversification, there seems to be something far more prominent when it comes to when it's investment from the United States. And I think this is something that not only is it just because of the tech and know-how, but this is a result also of a great deal of investment in soft power in the decades prior. So we're seeing a continuation of how previous policies of scholarships, of cooperation, of students mostly going to the United States, coming back to Saudi Arabia, and bringing with them kind of a different worldview. And I have to say, as someone who was, brought up here, in the late 90s and early 2000s, I could see how a great deal of Saudi society has evolved in their worldview. They've become more worldly. Okay, there's still many aspects and pockets of conservatism here and there. This also has to be part of the story. But there is a contingency that is different. And I think that makes the economic cooperation, the tech cooperation, more, I think it makes it easier to gel more.
Sure, and that tech really ties in as well with the fact we're talking here, aren't we, about a very young population. I haven't got the figure in front of me. I think it's 70%, that's right, 70% of the Saudi population under the age of 35. And there it is with a leader who's in Washington who is only just 40. I'm talking, of course, about Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So that's all very coherent. I just want to ask you lastly, I mean, obviously, we're talking today about Saudi-US relations, but there are other powers out there. There are other superpowers out there, China, Russia. Can Saudi have three friends in the form of the United States, Russia, China, or does it have to choose?
It's a very important question, and it's a question that is always asked, and it's been being asked for decades. Saudi certainly doesn't have to choose, but Saudi probably previously needed to choose. And that was just not because of Saudi. I think that was just the result of the international landscape. Now things have changed, and the international landscape has changed. And I think this is not only the opportunity, but for me, I think it's also the challenge that Saudi has now. The challenge to really begin to manage this diversification. And I think so far they are doing this. They are managing this, but I think there is room to improve, quite frankly. I think there's aspects of trying to manage this diversification. And one of them, for me, in my opinion, is obtaining an alliance in the United States. Why? Because I think seeking an alliance in the United States speaks to some of the anxieties that people have inside Washington, D.C. by saying, listen, you may be going abroad or you may be going out elsewhere. And in fact, I think the timing is very interesting because the Saudi Arabia the Saudi ruling elite choosing to seek an alliance when there is universal doubt of American reliability says, listen, we're still choosing you. And we're still trying to, you are our preference. We still want to work with you first. But first doesn't mean only. And I think there are also structural issues in the United States that lead to delays, for example, military procurement. And so right now, if there is military delays or military procurement delays or whatever kind of delays or bureaucracy or complications inside Washington, D.C. for anything, Saudis already have a great deal of options. So for Saudi, I think they've positioned themselves in a win-win situation. And this is part of the whole balancing act that they need to do it. In my opinion, I think they just need to, we all need to be more, I think, proactive on the discursive aspect by saying, that it is a win-win situation. And we all, our lens is a win-win situation, and not really a zero-sum situation.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time, but really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Always a pleasure. Dr. Aziz Al-Ghashian, a lecturer of international relations at Naif Arab University. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
My pleasure. Good to join you.
We're joined now by Mick Mulroy, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mick. Always a pleasure having you on the program. We're talking obviously today about Saudi US relations in light of the visit to Washington by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The ties go back about a century, and I just wanted to start by asking you how important you think Washington views this relationship with Saudi Arabia as being.
Good to be with you again, Tom. Very important. This has a potential to be a very consequential meeting today on a variety of topics, both for the interests of Saudi Arabia, the interests of the United States, the interests of the region, of course, being the Middle East, and for the relationship going ahead with both countries. There's going to be topics on economics, diplomacy, and of course, security is what we expect today.
Okay, we're expecting some big deals as well. We'll come on to those. Let's start by looking through the US lens. What do you think Washington wants to obtain from this visit?
Well, it's clear the White House has put a lot of effort into their 20-point plan for Gaza. That requires the contributions of many countries, both for this international stabilization force that was essentially approved yesterday in the United Nations, but also the reconstruction, which will require a substantial amount of funds to do so. And that is likely going to really rely heavily on Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries. So I think for the president's plan to get a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and to move ahead with stabilizing the region, Saudi Arabia is a big player with that. Also, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, which the president has put a lot of stock in. Saudi Arabia would not only be a very consequential new join, but they would likely open the way for many other countries to join as well.
Do you think that's likely to happen anytime soon?
I don't think it's likely to happen today. I think the discussions, of course, are going to be continued. They've already started. Saudi Arabia is likely to ask for things like a clear path and a clear commitment to a Palestinian state before they would agree to normalize relationships with Israel. I think they'll also be talking about really asking the U.S. to do more to end the conflict in Sudan, which has caused the most significant humanitarian crisis in the world right now. So there's going to be several asks, I think, from Saudi Arabia to the United States if they're going to normalize relationship with Israel. But that's likely what's going to be discussed today because there's a lot of benefits the U.S. could provide to Saudi Arabia as well.
Right, and they've had a joint diplomatic win, Saudi Arabia and the United States, during these last few months in the form of Syria. And only last week, the relatively new president of Syria was in Washington and was playing basketball with US officials. And we were talking about that on this channel. Why do you think Saudi Arabia and the United States were so keen to get that relationship right with the new leadership in Syria?
Well, Tom, I mean, obviously, Syria saw an extensive, long, very bloody and destructive civil war. The new president, although he's an interim president, is saying all the right things when it comes to essentially focusing inward on the development of his own country and the prosperity of his own people, all people in Syria, and less on, obviously allowing Iran and Russia to have a platform in Syria like the Assad regime. There's a lot of benefits for the United States to make sure that the interim government succeeds in Syria, but also for the region. Israel, of course, would not have to be so concerned about what is Iran doing in Syria if they were excluded from Syria. And Saudi would like to see that as well. They, I think, pushed President Trump to meet with al-Shura in the White House, and that happened. And I think they will be very much supporters of the further development of Syria, which could be very important, not just for security, but there's things such as the pipeline that could come out of the Middle East and go to Europe, would have to go through Syria, a gas pipeline that would help Europe come off of Russian energy, for example, huge economic benefits to the region to include Syria. There's a lot to discuss between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia on the future of Syria that's really would benefit not only the people of Syria, but the region's stability.
Yeah, another thing that might have changed perceptions about the region's stability was the Israeli strike on Qatar in September of this year. I'm wondering how much of a game changer you think that was to perceptions on the Arabian Peninsula about security?
I think that was a very significant event for not only the views in the region toward Israel's willingness to strike. In that case, it was the negotiation team for Hamas, which was there at the request of those pushing for a ceasefire, to include the United States. In fact, it was the U.S. proposal that was being considered by Hamas when they were targeted. And I think it really sent a shockwave not only to the leadership in Qatar, of course, but around the region, and likely led to this above major non-NATO allied status defense cooperation agreement between the United States and Qatar that is very unique, not just in the region, but around the world, without an actual treaty. And I think that that sparked an interest in Saudi Arabia to get something similar. And by all reports, they're going to ask the United States for something similar to this language, which is very similar to the language of Article 5 in the NATO treaty, to be given to them as well. And that might be a big, big carrot for Saudi Arabia to do things like actively consider joining the Abraham Accords in support for reconstruction in Gaza.
And actually, Mick, just looking back on what's happened the last couple of months, it wasn't long after the Israeli strike on Doha that Saudi Arabia signed a defense deal with Pakistan. And I was wondering how you think that was interpreted by Washington. Do you think Saudi Arabia was perhaps sending out a message?
Quite possible. There's been a lot of concern by our partners and allies about the way the U.S. now views even historical treaties like NATO and like the treaties we have in the far Indo-Pacific. And I think they looked to Pakistan, obviously a nuclear-capable, nuclear country, as a clear defense mechanism for themselves. That might have sent a message to Washington. Certainly the message that Qatar said clearly is we're going to need some serious guarantees if we're going to continue hosting your largest U.S. airbase in the Middle East in Al Udeid. And we're going to be targeted not only by Israel, but by Iran. If you remember, that was the case as well. And I think Saudi Arabia wants to see the same level of commitment. And based on all the requests that the United States and, of course, the historical ties between the U.S. and Saudi, it's likely to happen. But that, of course, is going to cause a domino effect. And other good partners in the region are going to look for that as well.
Okay, and just lastly, there is a 1,000-strong Saudi delegation now in Washington. And there is, of course, this summit tomorrow, this business forum, the US-Saudi Business Forum. What sort of deals, I mean, in what sorts of sectors will you be looking out for most, Mick?
I think it's going to be across the spectrum, really. Certainly in the high tech and the AI industry, there's a lot of discussion on that. That, of course, plays across all levels of economics and security. There'll be a discussion, of course, on the desire of Saudi Arabia to purchase, I think it's 48 F-35s. That will be the first non-Israeli country in the Middle East to get that. Of course, there'll be a lot of discussion on from the defense industry on what else Saudi would be interested in purchasing. It's really going to be a substantial event. And I imagine people from across the spectrum of business are going to be there and trying to, again, further the economic ties between the kingdom and the United States.
And what about those F-35 fighter jets that President Trump said will be sold now to Saudi Arabia? How significant would that be?
So I think it will be a very significant decision. He said yesterday in questions in the Oval Office unrelated to this event, but after another event, that he had decided to sell these F-35s to Saudi Arabia. So if that's the case, there is something called essentially requiring the United States to ensure the qualitative military edge of Israel in any decisions when it comes to defense assistance overseas. So this has to be viewed in that light. It's a self-imposed law, of course, on the United States. But I think they've already made that determination if the president's announcing that the sale is going to happen. So it will be controversial to some in the Senate, and there's certain ways they can put holds on it. But right now, at least from the executive branch of the United States, it looks like it's cleared to happen, which will be a significant advantage for Saudi Arabia and largely cause other countries, again, just like the Security Pact itself, to start asking the United States, why not us, such as the UAE, for example.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Really appreciate you speaking to us. Mick Mulroy, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.